Welcome to 2819. This is the show where we aim to inspire you to become disciples of all nations. I'm Sandra Dimes.
And I'm Brian Rohenbacher. And this is the television outreach of Reasons to Believe, a viewer-supported ministry where science and faith converge.
And you know, we are viewer-supported, so as a reminder, if you want to support resources like this show, visit reasons.org/2819 and be sure to click that support button.
And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit that subscribe button below. We want you to stay up to date on all the new videos that are coming out for 2819 and Reasons to Believe.
And if you want to stay up to date with us on social media, be sure to follow us. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at 2819 Show.
And don't forget, you can get the podcast version of 2019 on Apple Podcasts and Google Play. Just search Reasons to Believe Podcast.
And we have some news for you. You can now find us on Spotify. Again, just search for Reasons to Believe Podcast.
Yeah, and Spotify is also a great place. So if you just want more ways to find us and hear what we're doing, check that one out.
And in case you're wondering why we have this pie here, tell him, Brian.
This Thursday, March 14th, is Pie Day.
Yay! So we're going to have some fun with Pie Day a little bit later on in the show. But first, we have a quick rundown for you. In our Nexus segment, we're going to have Old Testament Studies professor Daniel Dyke discuss understanding Begat in biblical genealogies.
And in RTB 101, Sia will be talking with Ken Samples, and you're going to get a preview of Ken's new book, Classic Christian Thinkers.
And then in our Give and Take segment, Jeff will talk with Ken Samples about why we would expect mathematics to apply to the universe.
First up is Culture Talk, and going along with the Pi Day theme, Sandra's going to be talking with Hugh just kind of about the number of pi and also using math as an expression of the mind of God. Let's check that out.
Welcome to Culture Talk. This is the segment where we talk about the intersection of science, faith, and pop culture and how culturally relevant topics can be used to start conversations about your faith. I'm joined with Dr. Hugh Ross, astronomer and pie lover.
Pie lover?
Kind of. We're talking about the mathematical pie.
Right, yeah, because the other pie, not so much.
You won't touch it, right? Well, we're going to be talking about Pi Day, and that is March 14th or 3/14. But of course, we Americans like any excuse to have pie. So thinking about math now, what exactly is pi? P-I.
I'm glad you said pi, because pi is a circle, right? Mm-hmm. And so, pi is just simply the circumference divided by the diameter. That's it. So
for people who aren't mathematicians or who kind of shun math because it's scary for them, how can you help them understand what pi is used for?
Well, the very first computer program I ever wrote when I was a teenager was a computer program to calculate the value of pi to as many decimals as I wanted. And that's a fun exercise. Yeah. And to me, the significance of pi is it really shows how unique we humans are. We're compulsively symbolic in the way we think and talk, and pi is a great example of that symbolic compulsion. So that's what separates us from the animals.
Well, that's a great point. So when we think about math and we think about our ability to understand math, how then do we start to get a deeper insight into how we were made as humans? And you talk about the uniqueness. How do we understand that?
Well, it's our symbolic capability that allows us to engage in philosophy, mathematics, theology, to really begin to ask the big questions, to be able to take practical things and put it in a theoretical basis. I mean, so much of our life is theoretical, and without symbolic capability, that just simply wouldn't be possible.
So when you talk about symbolic capability, for our friends who maybe aren't sure what that means, how would you define that?
Well, think of numbers and letters, our ability to compose paragraphs, to speak in sentences. I mean, for example, parrots talk, but it's just little short phrases. We actually communicate in complex paragraphs, large vocabulary, where there's meaning and significance. And meaning and significance, it goes beyond just identifying different things in your realm, like cat, dog. Things like pie, it's just basically something that's abstract. And that's unique to us humans. We're abstract thinkers, we're problem solvers. And the problems we solve are abstract. It's not just getting food.
Right. So we're able to think of abstract, complex thoughts and to also create art and write and communicate on a deeper level.
A lot of art is mathematical in nature. My son's an artist, and he was always telling me how his capacity to do mathematics helps him to actually get a particular form and structure in his art. And so we think of art and music as being something non-mathematical, quite the opposite. It's highly mathematical, highly symbolic.
And it's really interesting for people who maybe aren't interested in math, but they are interested in art. If they start to understand the connection, they can get a deeper understanding of what makes us unique as humans. And from a Christian perspective, we have a very specific reason as to why we are unique and different from animals. So how would you explain that?
Well, for example, my wife is always amazed at how I can identify a composer just listening to the music. I listen for the mathematical patterns.
Oh, wow.
Because each composer seems to appreciate a certain mathematical complexity. You look for that, and even though I've never heard the piece before, you can figure out who the composer is. And that's just because we are symbolic beings.
Yeah. And so from a Christian perspective, then, what would we say gives us that unique, those unique characteristics?
Well, as the Genesis points out, there are three separate origins of life. The origin of life is purely physical. That would work for the microbes and the bacteria, which you see in creation day 5, when God creates life that's not just physical but soulish, where they got emotions, mind, and will. But there's one and only one species, that's body, soul, and spirit, with the capacity to think about God, communicate about God, and see God as non-physical. And so it's our capacity to think in abstract, symbolic ways that actually allows us to discover that there is a God and to actually develop a relationship with that God.
So you're talking about Genesis, and you're talking about humans being created in God's image, right?
Right.
So how then can we look at math and see it as an expression of God's mind?
Well, I was taught in my very first class in physics at the University of British Columbia, here's a key to success as a physicist. The right answer is always the one described by the most beautiful and elegant mathematics. What does that tell you about the Creator? If the math that describes the physical world has the epitome of elegance and beauty in it, that tells us that the Creator is a being that really appreciates beauty and elegance, and everything He creates expresses that, which means you're beautiful and elegant. I'm beautiful and elegant. Everything God creates. And so as we look at the real world, we look at animals, we can see that expression of beauty and elegance everywhere, and it even shows up in our number and letter system.
Yeah, and that's a great way to then share our faith with someone, to talk about them being beautiful and elegant, and talk about that we see beauty and elegance in the world. And
it's ubiquitous.
Right, and the reason we do is because we have a loving, caring, and artistic God who made it all available for us.
All those galaxies out there, they're beautiful and elegant.
Well, thank you so much, Hugh, for joining us. If you'd like to hear more from Dr. Hugh Ross, visit reasons.org and search Today's New Reason to Believe. Next, we're going to see a clip from Dr. Daniel Dyke, professor of Old Testament studies, and he's going to address the question, what does begat mean in biblical genealogies? Let's check it out.
So when you look at these genealogies and you've got this person begat that person, that the terminology, at least as I'm reading my English scriptures, seem to very much imply that these are father-son, father-daughter relationships. Is that the right way to look at those terms?
They can be. They can be father-son. For example, in the story of Abram and Hagar, we know that Abram slept with Hagar, and that Ishmael, who is born from Hagar, is the son of Abram and Hagar.
So that's a direct father-son relationship.
A direct father-son relationship. We know that Adam, when he begat his son Cain, it says Adam knew his wife, meaning had sex with his wife, and she conceived, which deals with the conception idea, and she brought forth a son.
So there are signs in there, or there are places where we do know that those are direct relationship, father-son.
Definitely father-son relationship. But we know also that this word, which in Hebrew is yalad.
This is what would be translated begat, or bore. Okay.
Yeah, begat. And it can be bore. It is used in the 39th chapter of Isaiah in relationship to King Hezekiah. King Hezekiah has done something wrong. He has shown the Babylonians his treasures. He's shown them everything that's in his palace.
Yeah, it's kind of a pride thing that he's doing.
An arrogant thing. Yeah. And then the prophet Isaiah comes to him and says, hey, watch out, because the day is coming when everything that's in your house is going to be taken away to Babylon. And one of the things he tells is going to be taken away is some of the sons which come forth from him. That's really a strange phrase. They come forth from him, which he begat, which
Yalad.
he begat them, and they will become eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon.
So his his children that he's begat are going to be taken away to Babylon.
But here's the problem. It didn't happen in his lifetime.
How much longer after?
100 years.
100 years. Okay.
Yeah, in the year 604 BC. Now that was said about 701. In the year 604, Nebuchadnezzar comes in, takes some people away. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, Daniel, if you remember him, and they're placed in charge of the chief eunuch, the head of the eunuchs, well, which is kind of a strange situation.
Right.
But included within that group are the royal children.
Okay.
And so that's the first time that anybody of the royal line is taken away.
So, this prophecy in Hezekiah by Isaiah about Hezekiah says that your children whom you begat, Yalad, are going to be taken away. But we've got at least 100 years before that happens.
Right. And
what I find interesting about that passage is that Hezekiah takes that as a sign that he's going to have peace in his days.
Right.
So
and so
he's looking at it as a much further off
he
time
sees
as
it way down the road. And so it's fulfilled in let me do this, I got to use my fingers here, great, great, great grandchildren.
So this is clearly a long time away. And that to me very clearly establishes that while Yalad can mean direct father-son relationships, it doesn't always mean that. In fact, there are numerous times through Scripture, in fact, you look at Leah, she begat more children than were her direct offspring. So Yalad doesn't necessarily mean direct offspring.
And Leah, in Genesis 46, is said to have born Yalad 35 children, I believe it is. 35, but she didn't have 35 children. They count her children, her grandchildren in this. And so she is a prime example of a person who bears a child, but it's not hers, it's some later generation.
So Yalad has a broader meaning than just simply a direct father-son, father-daughter relationship.
To learn more about this topic, visit reasons.org and search Genealogies. Now it's time for RTB 101. This is a segment where we talk about practical questions to equip our viewers to share their faith with their friends and family more effectively. I'm Anastasia Young, and I'm here with my friend and theologian, Kenneth Samples. And Ken, you and I are both lovers of church history and church fathers.
Yes.
And don't you ever wish that you could just somehow package that passion and give it to your fellow Christians?
I do. I think that if you've never read about or read St. Athanasius or St. Augustine, you've missed something so significant. But I think part of it is Protestants typically think of theology in terms of Bible study rather than historical and philosophical thought as well.
That's true. But good news is you have actually done that. You've packaged this for us in your newest book, Classic Christian Thinkers. Now, you've taken 9, I don't know how you chose just 9 out of all of these great thinkers, but you've taken 9 of these great thinkers and you've put them into this book. Why don't you actually tell us a little bit about your book?
Yeah, exciting for me to do this. I love church history. I look at these individuals not as just historical figures, but they're mentors to me, they're friends, they're people who speak my language. I'm a bookish guy. And so going all the way back to Irenaeus, all the way up to C.S. Lewis, it's a book I was excited to write, and I would love for many of my evangelical friends to get to know these great Christian thinkers. I think they could add so much to your life, to your devotion, teach us about apologetics, theology, evangelism.
Now, you didn't have a great book like this to get you started. What got you launched into the love of these church fathers and these great thinkers?
Yeah, when I went to college, I studied philosophy, and in philosophy you don't talk about faith. And at the church I was attending at the time, you don't talk about reason. So I felt kind of like the man left out. I wasn't comfortable at church with faith. I wasn't comfortable in philosophy with just reason. One of my professors said, Ken, why don't you read St. Athanasius, St. Augustine, St. Anselm? they're people that would relate to you. And so I began reading them. I fell in love with them. And what's also exciting, Sia, is these people have written books that are not just Christian classics. They're classics of Western civilization. These are men that have shaped not only Christian orthodoxy, but Western civilization.
Now, Ken, I have to admit that when I read your book, I was so excited because it was like the book of Acts was just coming out from beyond the pages of Scripture into history itself. And so in that same spirit of how the gospel just went out, how can reading Athanasius or Irenaeus or even C.S. Lewis help us practically with sharing the gospel?
Yeah, I think what's helpful here is these are not biblical authors. This is after Scripture had been written down and codified, but it's still God using His church. It's still God leading and guiding. And there were a lot of things that are not explicitly hammered out about the Trinity or about the Incarnation or about the atonement. So I don't think we should miss the fact that God is still working through His church, even though the apostolic age was unique. And we can't go back to that, but we can recognize that God's leading continues today in His church that is great and wonderful and yet also flawed.
Amen. Thank you so much for joining us, Ken.
You're welcome.
To get a copy of Ken's new book for yourself, visit shop.reasons.org and search Classic Christian Thinkers. Now let's go over to Jeff, where Ken is joining him to take on the subject of why would we expect mathematics to apply to the universe?
Hello, Jeff Zwarenk, and thanks for joining us again for Give and Take, the segment of the show where we look at how science and Christianity work together so that you can be more confident in sharing the truth of the faith. Today I'm joined by my colleague and friend Ken Samples, and we're going to explore why mathematics so effectively describes the universe in which we live. Ken, it's good to have you here.
Nice to be with you.
You know, I remember when I was in college, I was taking a bunch of math classes, a bunch of physics classes, and in one of my math classes, we spent a lot of time dealing with imaginary numbers, you know, taking the square root of 1 and finding these holes and planes, and it was just bizarre mathematics. A few weeks later, I'm taking a physics class, and we're using that process to solve real-world physical problems.
Wow.
Why is it that mathematics so effectively describes the cosmos?
You know, I think this is one of the most interesting and provocative issues, Jeff. Like you, although I didn't take nearly as many science classes, when I took a physics course, I immediately realized that physicists look at the world through the prism of mathematics. And I was struck by the fact that math corresponded to the nature of reality. And being a philosophy major, I immediately began asking, why does math work? And doesn't that make sense in a Christian worldview? But what about an atheistic naturalist worldview where there's no mind behind the universe? I think that's a provocative topic, and I think it could be marshaled as an argument for theism.
Yeah, and I want to explore and kind of dig into that because there's part of me. I mean, you know, we've had these discussions enough, and you know, I look at that and say, well, of course it works because I've just seen practically that it works out so often. Why is it surprising that mathematics describes the universe?
Well, let's say that there's no mind behind the universe. Let's say the universe is the product of blind, mechanistic, natural processes. So there isn't any intellectual guide to the process. I mean, math strikes me as this deeply intellectual, cerebral idea process. So why should a human being who evolved, I mean, our brains evolved, we come up with ideas in our brain that actually correspond to the nature of the universe? I mean, it seems amazingly improbable. There's no way to understand how that could conceivably happen as an accident.
So the idea you're articulating is that if this is all just kind of the way it is, if you will, there's no mind, there's no rationality, there's no reason behind it, if you will, why is it that our minds, which are just part of the natural world, have this capacity to describe things symbolically, logically, coherently with very complex mathematical, relationships. The idea that you can divide by 0 and take the square root of -1, things that are no-nos, are actually an integral part of how we do this mathematical work.
And if the universe is written in the language of mathematics, isn't it an amazing thing that we as accidental creatures in the process of evolution can detect that mathematical and come up with models that correspond to the universe? It sounds like it's a rigged game from my point of view.
Well, and to me, this seems obvious that this fits within a Christian worldview, Judeo-Christian worldview. If God is the mind behind the universe, the idea that He's created us with His image, that we can understand His creation, that just seems to fit coherently. How would you articulate this argument for the truth of the Judeo-Christian worldview?
Well, I would say, look, the Christian model is, as you say, God created the world. He created it with math and logic, with the laws of physics. They flow from His nature. He made us in His image. Then He networked Himself, us, and the universe together. So there is this connection. In fact, I think if Christianity is true, we should anticipate that math would work. We should anticipate that our minds would correspond to the universe. If there's no mind behind the universe, if math is just an undefinable or unexplainable reality, and if we're the product of blind luck, chance, that seems to be at odds. I'm not saying that non-Christians, atheists don't appreciate math and science, but the question here is, who has the best model of explanation? I think clearly it's on the side of theism.
So how would you use this? So you're out talking to someone who's skeptical, doesn't believe the truth of Christianity, but very much has a scientific bent to themselves. How would you use this idea to engage them with the gospel?
I think what I would say is intelligent people, when they want to solve challenging issues, they appeal to a toolbox, and that toolbox is mathematics, the laws of logic, the laws of physics. That's how intelligent people work. When they want to work something through, they bring these intelligent processes to bear on various issues. But now the question is, how do we explain logic, math, and our scientific abilities? It seems to me those fit better with God. And I would say, look, if you're a person who prizes mathematics and logic and reason and rationality, that fits well with the idea that there is a great mathematician, the scientist who has created a process that is cogent.
So it seems like in some sense this allows us to come alongside with the skeptic, if you will, and say, yeah, there's just this powerful tool, mathematics and science, that allows us to articulate and understand and explore the world. But then we can kind of push deeper and say, why does it work that way?
Yes.
So there's this common ground that we have and an appreciation for science and mathematics. But as a Christian, we can come and say, hey, I think we've got a better explanation here.
I think that's exactly right. I think that we should appeal when non-Christians love math, love science, love reasoning. I think we should say we have a worldview that is compatible, that provides an explanation for all of those wondrous realities.
Well, thanks, Ken. I appreciate your comments. Science is a powerful tool that we have to understand the universe. And as Ken said, the language of science is mathematics. And it is just remarkable, and it's appreciated by Christians and non-Christians alike, how well mathematics describes this creation in which we live. I'd encourage you to go check out Ken's blogs. He's written a lot about the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics in describing our universe. Go to reasons.org and search for unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics, and you'll get access to his thoughts that will equip you to be able to share how this powerful tool, science and mathematics, actually points to there being a creator, the God of the Bible, who made all of this so that we can enjoy and explore and ultimately know Him better.
That does it for us this week on 2819. We hope you enjoyed this episode and that you enjoy Pi Day.
We hope also that you've been encouraged to share your faith with someone new today and to do so with confidence and compassion.
And if you want to support resources like this show, please visit reasons.org/2819.
And don't forget, connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, or at 2819 Show. We'd love to hear what's your favorite pie.
That's right. See y'all next time.
Bye.